Over the 9 weeks, I read books categorized as alternative voices. This theme has allowed me to explore diverse topics and sensitive topics at that, such as sexuality, religious trauma, drug addiction, and drug abuse. And I'm grateful I chose this topic because I was able to understand and sympathize with the people going through this and experiencing these things, and the characters who lead completely different lives than me. I feel like I understand them more. And yeah. So the books I chose were Beautiful Boy, Boy Erased, and Little and Lion. And so I'll start there. Little and Lion was written by Brandy Colbert, and it focuses on Suzette, who is a 16-year-old girl who's returning from boarding school. Unfortunately, a lot of problems surface upon her arrival, and some of the problems she deals with are her sexuality and navigating that, figuring out who she is and who she wants to love, and different love interests upon that. And also, one of the biggest parts of the entire book, which is, it's insane to me, is falling in love with a girl who her brother is also in love with. So that was very interesting to read. Also, her brother I just mentioned has recently been diagnosed with bipolar, so she's trying to comfort him and comfort herself and kind of deal with it along with her family. And all of this on top of each other, it's a lot. Like, just the three alone before the diagnosis is a lot, but now since the diagnosis, it gets a lot to read and also to live for Suzette. And yeah, what I liked about this book was the diversity and representation. This was one of the first books, or the only book that I've read that was so open with LGBTQ and like different experiences through that, which is so, like, I don't know, it was just so nice to see like someone else going through that, you know. The main character is Black, Jewish, and a part of the LGBTQ, and someone who is also a person of color and is a part of the LGBTQ. It's so, I just feel very seen and represented through her, because it's not every day you read a book with someone who's Black, Jewish, and a part of the community as the lead character, you know? I also like the connections and the relationships I was able to make with my own personal connections. For example, Suzette and Lionel, they started out as not so close, and, you know, they're still brother and sister, but they weren't as close. But as they matured and grew older, they became closer and had a deeper understanding of each other. And that reminds me of me and my little brother. When we were younger, we're not close at all, but now we're like inseparable and best friends now that we're older. What I thought could have been better was the Rafaela and Lionel relationship. I didn't feel the need for it, to be honest. It just felt kind of rushed and unnecessary and petty. There wasn't a lot of chemistry that I saw or I felt between those two. It just felt like more drama on top of everything else going on that wasn't needed. But yeah, this book was definitely made for people who are a part of the LGBTQ community and its allies. I also think this book should only be read by people who are 16 and up, because it deals with very mature topics. And if you're not 16, as long as you are able to handle and read and understand mature topics, then yeah, I think you should be good. Overall, I really enjoyed reading this book, and I appreciated once again the diversity and representation. It's very important that I'm exposed to that, given it's my own community, and yeah, especially in literature, like, very important. And I would like to rate this book a 4 out of 5. The next book I would like to talk about is Boy Erased by Gerard Conley. This book is a memoir or true story about the author, who was unfortunately outed as gay to his parents. With his parents being in the church, very religious, his dad is a pastor, and his mom, obviously a pastor's wife, they weren't accepting at all of him, and in fact they sent him to a conversion therapy camp, which is insane to me. And within this therapy camp, a lot of his trauma stems from there. Unfortunately, conversion therapies are something queer people go through a lot, and even now, present time, in some states, conversion camps are legal and encouraged, which is insane to me, but that's a whole different topic. What I liked about this book was the author's strength and honesty while writing this book. Like, I don't know, the way he was able to not only go through this one time, but go through it another time and write it down and then share it with millions of people is insane to me. I don't think I could ever have the bravery that Gerard Conley has. The only problem I had with this book was the time jumps. It might just be me as a reader because I'm not very good at reading, but I just felt lost and confused. Like, at some points we would be present in the conversion place, and then the next second he's back in high school, and I know there's dates included, but I don't know. I felt like overwhelmed with so many time jumps. I think this book was written for people within the community, of course, and especially for people who don't understand the hardships that LGBTQ plus members go through, especially within conversion camps. And I know these types of people aren't very willing to sit down and sympathize and read an entire book about it, but I feel like if they did, they would have such a different perspective on everything, like, regarding that. Overall, this book gave me a very different, diverse, and personal perspective on conversion therapies. Obviously, prior to reading this book, I knew that they were horrible, but now I feel like reading a true story about it, I really understand exactly what queer people go through who go through conversion therapies, and I feel like I have a whole new way of sympathizing with people who have gone through that, and I understand it so much better. Once again, I appreciate the honesty and openness of the author writing this book and sharing it. That's something I will always admire authors for doing, but especially him. Yeah. Overall, I gave this book a 4.7 out of 5. And finally, the last book, and my personal favorite, is Beautiful Boy. David Sheff wrote this book about his son, Nick, going through his addiction with meth. It starts with giving background on Nick's childhood and how much of a good kid he was and how he was brought up, and basically his life prior to getting into drugs and alcohol and facing all of that. As the book continues, his addiction obviously gets worse and worse and worse, and his family, especially his dad, more about their emotions are revealed throughout the book. David Sheff writes about the frustration and sadness and so many more emotions that his family went through, and it just shows how he lived through his son's addiction and how much he wanted him to get better, but how frustrating it was at times when it wasn't working out. A few things I liked about this book were the realistic aspect of it. It didn't just show the after effects of drugs and just that person. It showed before what type of person Nick is and was before drugs, and then it showed the after effect and how everyone who loves him was affected as well. It's not just the person going through the addiction. I also like the information about drugs in specifically chapter 11. I remember this. An entire section of this chapter was dedicated to the research that David Sheff did to kind of understand his son's addiction more and more about meth and what type of drug it is and how it affects a person's brain and like how it controls everything they do. I feel like that's very important, and I appreciate that a lot because now the reader understands so much more about drugs. And not only that, it also shows how much he cared about his son's addiction, you know? Regardless of the fact that he's writing an entire book, the fact that he included that just says a lot. And I also have a deep appreciation for the emotional and vulnerability aspect of this. Same thing with Boy Erased. It's one thing to live and watch and go through this one time, but writing it down, reliving everything, reliving all the feelings, and making it such a beautiful and emotional book, I just have a great appreciation for that. I don't have any real negative things I disliked about this book. I found it hard to continue reading at the times Nick's sobriety ended and he relapsed. It was hard reading that, but of course I realized that that's just a part of addiction and that's what they face. That's the reality of it. I think this book was intended for anyone willing to sympathize with a family going through someone's addiction and how it affected it. I see that anyone could really read this as long as they're able to handle mature topics, just like Little and Lion. Yeah, this book is such a beautiful book. I love it so much. I see this book as the start of my love of reading. This is the first book I read on the list, and I'm so grateful I did because I understand so much more about the beauty and pain of this book and how much, I don't know, it's just such a beautiful book. It was so beautifully and thoughtfully written, and it gave a realistic depiction on addiction and how it affects everyone surrounding the persons. Everyone who loved Nick, all of his friends, families, love interests, everyone who cared about him and how much it really affected them as well. And I happily give this book a 5 out of 5. These books allowed me to explore different perspectives and experiences, and I felt like I lived through the characters and I was there with them so many times. And I gained so much new perspective and new information from each book. Each book gave me something that I'll cherish forever. And they really changed my view. As cliche as this sounds, they really changed my view on how I view everything, like how I view certain topics in society or certain people in society and all of that. So I'm really grateful for that. And I'm grateful for each alternative voice I was able to listen to through these books.